Imagine a world where humanity pursued unity over division. Imagine a world where humanity acknowledged the oneness of everything in the universe. Imagine a world where humanity chose love and light over everything else. It's Not My Credit to Take explores the stories of people from all walks of life who seek to uplift humanity and restore Christ consciousness on this planet. Their unique journeys of tapping into their gifts, talents, and the infinite consciousness are amazing, and their willingness to share them to wake up humanity to their true essence and potential is even more remarkable. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be inspired. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, and welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast. Hello, Gail. How are you today?
Hi, Ed. I'm great today. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation. My guest today is Gail Behrend. Gail is an engineer, author, speaker, and energy healer. Midway through a successful 20-year engineering career, she experienced a spontaneous spiritual awakening, which changed her life, transforming her from skeptic to seeker. Her spiritual journey eventually led her to explore human energy and alternative healing as a side vocation. And as a graduate of the Barbara Brennan School of Healing, Gail has been an energy practitioner in Vancouver, Canada for over 25 years. She loves teaching people about their subtle energy nature and empowering them to own their energy so they can truly own their lives. Gail, welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So, why don't you get us started and so we can learn a little bit more about you and where you have ended up in your life?
Well, it's probably best to start where I started because it's so different from where I am now. I was very much a left brain logical engineer before all this started and loved science and I loved my work as an engineer. And I wasn't spiritual at all. I didn't have a Bible I wouldn't allow a Bible in my house just because I didn't grow up with religious programming, except my parents had their own, which sort of filtered down through. So my dad was very anti-religious because he grew up in a family where his parents were of different. They were both Protestants, but they were different churches, different types of church. And and they fought over where he would get confirmed, and so he was sort of pulled apart by this battle, and it made him highly allergic to organized religion, into all spirituality, although I suspect he was a deeply spiritual man. But anyway, that was on the one side. My mom thought of church as like a place to go to socialize with your community, and she had fond memories of religion, but my dad won, and so we didn't. And so I kind of picked up that attitude from him, the scientific, it's all, well, that spirit doesn't exist and nothing beyond the physical exists, a very materialistic perspective. And I grew up with, so I ended up aligning with that and going the scientific route and ended up actually following my father's footsteps and becoming an engineer. So by the time I was in my 30s, I had a successful career. I was doing really well and loved my work. And I had this very left brain logical fixed viewpoint of the world. And I wasn't an atheist because that's having a position about God. And I figured we didn't have enough data to make that conclusion. So I had to admit there was something about the amazing order in the universe. I mean, it was just too coincidental for there not to be some greater intelligence. Laws don't just happen out of in a vacuum and out of a random thing. They were just so perfect, and there was such evidence of that. So I suspect that there was something, but it was way bigger than anything I could get my mind around. And I thought if there was a God, it was really more like some impersonal consciousness that just did what it did, and we were kind of little microbes that were beneath notice, and so I just saw it as operating the universe, and And what happened actually down on Earth was really kind of beneath his concern, kind of thing. That was my projected idea, and so I called myself an agnostic. So basically, the position of the agnostic is, I don't know, you know, and seemed like a safe, easy out. But I inherited my dad's allergy to religion because of the history of the church and its various permutations and combinations. It has a lot to answer for, and so I was kind of angry about that and felt that, and also it didn't have a very, it wasn't friendly to women. And being a woman, that didn't feel good either. So I had to, it did, and I was born a feminist. So at that time, it was in the 50s. So, women really weren't equal in those days. It was overt. It wasn't something hidden and behind the scenes. It was part of our life, and people's expectations of what a woman could do or not do were very low. Basically very limited. And so becoming an engineer was my way of saying I can so do this. And so that was where I was, and I had developed, after 20 years, had developed some confidence in myself as an engineer and as a person, and actually enjoyed my work and got along with my colleagues. And so in my neat ordered world, and I had a boyfriend. We lived together. We'd been together 4 years, and we were out looking house hunting and talking about settling down and starting a family and all of that. And so I felt like things were rolling along on a neat ordered track, which included, the house in the suburbs, a minivan, the whole thing. That was my life, and it just felt like this is where I was going. And I didn't even think much about other possibilities. It just seemed like that was it. That was my program, and I loved him. He was the man I loved and was committed to, and felt that we had talked about marriage and kids and that sort of thing. I believed he loved me and was equally committed. And then I had a rude awakening when it turned out that, and we were living in my place, that he started seeing someone else while we were living together. And when I found out, I was devastated, and my whole neat little world got rocked, and I had to send him away because he couldn't live in my place and still see other people. So that was it. And I was felt deeply hurt, and not only hurt, but like, what can I trust? I thought my heart, I could trust that. I could trust the man I was living with, that we were fondly talking about what we would do in the future, build the future we would build together. And suddenly all of that was a lie. And so I went into this deep spiral of despair, and especially since I'd committed my heart to him. So it was suddenly, I can't have, the I can't have. I thought I had that one chance at love, and that I'd lost it, and it felt like my whole future fell off the edge of a cliff. Like the earth had opened up, and my future was on the other side of the crevasse, and it tumbled into the abyss. And I went into this self-judging and self-punishing state where I was, the sometimes our ego can kick us when we're down, and it was giving things like, "Oh, you're a loser. You can never have. That was it. You blew it." Whatever it was. And I had been in the later, like, I guess, the last few months of our relationship. My partner had been becoming more and more critical of everything. It seemed like everything I did irritated him, even and I would change to try and adapt so that we could get along and things would keep rolling, right? And so I gave up a lot of my individuality in the process. Over that time, my self-esteem became reduced to the point where I was willing to give myself up to continue to have the relationship, and then that was rejected. So basically, I went into this deep spiral of self-judgment and lack of worth, and I ended up eventually spiraling so deep and so bleakly that it was like, if I can't, I've lost my one chance at love. If I can't have love, and if I'm totally unlovable, why live? And I was contemplating how to end it. And as I was feeling the depths of how worthless and unlovable I was, and feeling that that was it, I'd lost it, I suddenly had this voice in my head show up, not my voice. It just came out of nowhere. Big, strong voice saying, "But I love you." And it was accompanied by this amazing rush of energy down through the top of my head, like a column of golden pinky light coming all the way down through my whole spine into my body, into every cell, right into the atoms. It seemed that I was flooded by this incredible loving energy. It was vast, and it was, at the same time as it was vast and deeply loving, it was also intimate. It's like I could feel it emanating from within my cells as well as coming from outside. It was like I was held in this vast embrace, and it was infinitely loving. And I went into this expanded state. I was so surprised because that was so different from the state I was in a few seconds before. And I could never have guessed that this reality even existed. It was like suddenly the world opened up, and I realized, oh my God, there's a lot more to this reality than I thought. I had poo-pooed the idea of paranormal or any other dimensions, and just said, yeah, I'm sure there's a scientific explanation. We just don't know it yet, right? And suddenly it was in my face. Yes, there is, and you're loved, and to actually tangibly feel that love in every cell, and that even my flaws, everything that I thought was wrong about myself and all that stuff was loved. They were loved, and I got this knowing as I was in that they are just places of becoming. They're places where they're abilities that haven't developed yet. So as a beginner, they're not full. They don't work well, and that those flaws were actually just places of becoming, and that they were loved for that, because the eternal sees the whole picture and sees the final picture as well. And so all of this sort of information, this knowing, I won't call it information because it wasn't like watching YouTube. It was just a deep knowing, and I went into this expanded state where I was sort of seeing the earth from the cosmos, and I just felt this incredible embrace of love for the whole earth and for all of us on it, and that this love wasn't just for me, but it was for all of us. It's the truth that Jesus spoke about, right? That our creator was infinitely loving, not some tyrant, and which had been the view before he came. And so having this tangible experience of it, and I didn't know really what was that voice. I was being this agnostic. I really didn't know what it was, but I did. It was so amazing and so uplifting and expanding, and I just felt so seen finally for the first time in my life, so totally seen and loved with everything, that I could never forget that. So I was high for a bit, whoa, and then my engineer brain kicked in, and it said, "What was that?" Whoa. And so as I calmed down, I had to figure it out. I had to find out what that was, and that began my seeking path. I needed to know this, and I wasn't willing to take anyone's word for it. I had to find out for myself, and so coming from that scientific perspective, I had my first thing was to research, and of course, in those days, that was when did that happen? In the 80s. We didn't have internet then. We didn't have you know any online research wasn't a thing in those days. I don't know if we even had email then, so we were left with books. That was it. So I did an enormous amount of reading, and I started sort of shyly mentioning or asking questions of some of my more open-minded friends, and they would lend me books or point me to various things to help me in my education. And of course, I was also guided. So I was I would feel impulses to get a book or something, or one book would lead me to another. So the first thing I did as a result of that shock was I thought, well, the closest thing I can think of is maybe a near-death experience where people have had that transformative experience, I guess, like a wake-up call, or I don't know. So I did read that, and then I realized, wow, yeah, that's similar to what I experienced, and I needed to know more. And I ended up, next thing I was interested in. I'd read one of the books. Was talking about near-death experience, but also it somehow included some sort of past life recall. And they talked about this psychologist who had regressed a patient. He was trying to regress her to the infancy or the womb, and he went too far, and she ended up regressing to before birth, and thinking about her life to come, and watching her parents make love, but she was about to enter to be conceived, and whoa, some more mind blowing. So that when my mind was being slowly expanded, and eventually I was introduced to some channeled material. Now I would never have read anything channeled in those days. That was just too weird. But because of my experience, now my ordered world was disrupted, and I knew there was more. So I was willing to suspend my disbelief until after I'd read it and then decide. And so I was led to books by Jane Roberts, which are information that she received about the nature of consciousness and personal reality. And it answered questions that made sense. And I ended up, a friend loaned me her book. It was just a thin paperback. And I'm a fast reader, but it took me a year to read it because every paragraph was so full of mind blowing information that I had to stop and go, whoa, and let it sort of settle in before I could proceed to the next paragraph. And the weird part was, as I was reading this information, it was talking about not only past lives, but parallel lives and multiple dimensions, that we all exist at the same time, that and we do in our dream state, we actually expand into these other aspects of ourself. And all of that was mind blowing. And what was really strange was, as I was reading this information, I started feeling all these little tingles in my brain, and it felt like little synapses being connected, and little locks being turned, and that little tumblers dialing. Suddenly, I realized I know this. I had no idea how I knew it. It just was suddenly it's like clicking into place, like something I once knew, but not in this life, was suddenly I was remembering it. It felt like I was remembering it, and that was really bizarre because my I only really knew this life, and suddenly it was like, whoa. So anyway, this went on for about 10 years of searching. I was eventually led to new age authors like and personal development authors like Wayne Dyer and Louise Hay and that sort of thing. And really, I was hungry to learn as much as I could about this new reality. And the other thing I was led to, which was really helpful, because I was also trying to say, was that God? What was that? And so I was seeking for something that could give me a context, because I didn't have a context. So something that could give me some sort of spiritual context that would resonate with my experience, because from what I'd seen in other, more conventional religious texts, it was different. And yet it was so wonderful and so uplifting and joyful and true to my heart. I thought there must be something that will help me understand this. And so I was led to A Course in Miracles, just through circumstances and synchronicities. I started reading A Course in Miracles, which is a self-study course on how to open to the voice of the Holy Spirit within you, which is the voice. In the Course in Miracles, they call it the voice for God. And I thought, that's what I had, was a voice. And it was so vast and loving. I guess it was a voice for God. I don't know, but it's the first step of something clicking. And so I was intrigued and I started studying it, and I loved what I read. And it was so totally empowering and loving, and teaching forgiveness, teaching how to be silent and listen to that still voice within, not the shrieking ego, but the voice that's so quiet it's easy to ignore. So you have to listen carefully, but it's there, and if you do, it's worth it. And so part of the course, it has a workbook, 365 lessons. You do one a day, and each one, it says in the introduction that you don't have to believe it, you don't have to even like it, just do it. It said the experience will teach you. And so basically, you're learning to trust what you're getting, and you put it to the test. And so that's what you're asked to do. Just try it, see what happens. And just steadily it built that trust. And I did things like, I was in my journeys, my synchronicities, I ended up helping a friend run a French country inn. And when I had just arrived, and she asked me to go get, the next morning, to go get fresh bread from the bakery in the nearest village. And I had no idea even how to get there, but she forgot to tell me, so I had to find out. And so I thought, okay, here's a test. And I asked the inner voice, say, okay, get me to this bakery. And so I just drove on these little twisty country lanes, and every time there was a fork in the road, I was told which way to go. And then I ended up finally in this village, and I still had no idea where the bakery was, and it just kept giving me left, right, yeah, and then it would say, okay, we're here. And I thought, I opened the car door, and there was a smell of fresh baked bread. So I was like, whoa, this works. So that simple little experiments like that, where you just try it, and next thing I knew, so that each lesson slowly built my confidence, and I've done it for over 30 years now. So I finished the workbook, and then I ended up joining study groups and that sort of thing. But really, it's an internal journey, and you're learning to listen and learning to follow through and to trust what you're being told, not blindly, but to test it, and to trust that if it's true, it'll prove itself true. I think there's a phrase in the Bible, I think that Jesus says, by their fruits shall ye know them. And so this was basically demonstrating that. And so I've been doing it ever since then. And it's just I'm often moved to tears by the beauty of the text and how it really resonates with truth for me. And so there's, at no time has it ever not aligned with my experience. It's been totally congruent with it. So I'm not trying to sell it or anything. I'm just sharing that's what gave me a context, a sense of understanding of what I had experienced, and more. So through studying this and following guidance, I ended up having other experiences that were unusual, yet were deeply loving. And one of the things I love about it is it has an undo button. If you like, it provides this mind hack, if you like, that enables you to undo any mistake you may have made now or in the past. And basically you just hand it over to the Holy Spirit and say, ask Holy Spirit, please undo every consequence of any errors or wrong decisions I may have made in this situation, in this relationship, or whatever. Decide for God for me. And you don't have to be a Course in Miracles student to use this. It's open to anybody. And then, lo and behold, it like everything you were worried about happening in that situation just dissolves and turns into a positive experience. And I've never had it not do that. So I thought, well, whoa, who wouldn't like an undo button for aspects of their life, right? Haven't we all made mistakes in relationship, especially with our loved ones, where we were maybe in a bad mood and we said something we didn't wish we hadn't, and then they're hurt. So it's been an amazing reference for me to apply in my life. And I don't normally speak about it in my podcast interviews because a lot of people are also are allergic to they're into the paranormal and stuff like that. But when we're starting to use Christian terminology like the Holy Spirit and Jesus, that sort of thing, some people put the brakes on. And so I don't want to scare anyone. It's for me, it's actually uplifting and empowering and joyful. And it gives me this sense of safety in my life that I feel like wherever I go, I have this loving support, and it's there for me when I need it. So I guess it's a rather a long-winded question, but that's how I got to here.
I'm curious how you would help someone through a similar experience. And what I mean by that is after you had that moment of being enveloped in love, after having been betrayed, after living a life left brain logical, agnostic, and then on the other side of that initial spiritual experience, you went seeking, and in many ways it sounded like you were intellectualizing the process to an extent. How would you help someone in a similar situation to move through the intellectualization of God or the spiritual world or whatever faster?
Well, it was very much I was guided by my feelings, even though I was intellectualizing it after the fact. I was very much guided by the experience that I'd had, which was in my heart. Because I had basically broken down at that point. I had run out of ideas, for my life. My intellect hadn't solved my problems, and although I loved using it in my work, what I had experienced touched my heart, and so I learned over time. I didn't know it, immediately. What I would say to somebody is to trust your heart. Your heart is is your kind of your truth compass, your truth detector, your truth compass. If it makes you afraid, if it makes you feel helpless and disempowered, then it's not true. If it's if it fills you with joy and warms your heart and makes you feel loving and positive towards others, and and makes you more gentle towards yourself, then it's true. So love is the key behind it, and if it's not loving, it's not true. And over time, I've tested that, and I've discovered that if it doesn't, if if the truth feels unloving, it turns out it's because we haven't gone deep enough. We're still at the level of the intellect and the ego. And when you finally touch the truth, you can't deny it. It's just your whole being says, "Yeah, okay." And the best part is it is wholly loving. So and you don't want to deny it once you've experienced it, right? I mean, it's just so much better than the alternative.
What I hear you describing is Christ consciousness, where it's grounded in love and joy and peace and unity. And anything that is anti any of those ultimately doesn't fit. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, it's actually that's right. Anything else is really the ego. It's and the course doesn't talk about like church or Christianity talks about Satan as the bad guy. And whereas the Course in Miracles says it's the ego it's a false self that we've constructed ourselves from infancy, based on our experiences and what we learned from others. And of course, it's a jumble of conflicting ideas because it came from so many different places. And we just took it all in willy-nilly as infants and believed what the adults were telling us. But what we end up with is this constructed idea of ourselves that doesn't agree with itself. So even if you do what the ego tells you to do and you do it and things go wrong, which often happens when you follow the ego that says, "What do you do that for?" It's like it's not happy either way, right? It tells you what to do, and then when you do it and it doesn't work, it tells you you're to blame. And so for following its guidance, so it's just crazy. It's just insane, and it's crazy making if you try and please the ego, and other people will tend to sort of mirror similar kinds of thinking because that's where it came from in the first place. So it doesn't lay the blame on some major opponent to God. It says this is just as part of the human experience. It's how we learn and it's how we develop a sense of self from the beginning. Because we don't remember where we came from when we first come into this life, and we have to figure it out from our experiences and from our family. And so we carry the ego feels like us because we're told it is, and we believe it because it's the only voice we know in our head. And it's only if you start examining it that you realize it doesn't even agree with itself. You start to realize that the ego, whatever it tells you, changes from moment to moment, and it's just flip flopping. It's just basically guessing. And how can you build a life on that? And whereas when you're coming in from your heart is consistent and it's loving and it's it's willing to forgive, it's willing to open and explore and to learn more about the truth. It's not immediately afraid of the unknown. It's it's more trusting, and it's not saying you blindly accept everything, but you're more open minded in that sense.
How were you able to move beyond the betrayal that you experienced from that relationship?
Oh, that's a great question. It After, as I said, it took me 10 years intellectually seeking, and then I learned enough from what I learned that that if you don't heal emotional wounds or mental beliefs that are harmful, like self-hating type beliefs and that sort of thing, over time that can lead to physical illness. And I realized after the 10 years, finally I realized, I never healed my broken heart. I never healed that betrayal. I still carry it, and it's because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to heal it, and so I had just thought intellectually I could solve it, but I realized it. I was sensing something intuitively that I better start getting some healing, because if I don't, I felt like something sort of hovering. I didn't have any symptoms yet, but I could feel something was off, and that if I wasn't careful, that I might get ill, um, especially in the heart, the area. And so I basically said, okay, so how do I heal my emotions? How do I heal that? And I happened to be living in Hamburg at the time, in Germany, and went to a New Age bookstore which carried a good selection of English titles. And I was looking for something to help, because that's where I would go. My go-to is books, right? So something to help me heal my emotions. And as I was sort of looking at this bookshelf, the staff came by with a load of new books, and they put one right in front of my face on the shelf right in front of me, and it was entitled "The Healing of Emotions." so that's how obvious spirit had to be for me to get it right. Like, here
Yep.
you go. And so I thought, okay, I think this one's for me. So I took it. It was written by a healer in New Mexico, Chris Griscom, and she's not that well known in the U.S., but in Europe they love her, and she's was made famous by Shirley MacLaine. And if you've read any of Shirley MacLaine's books on her spiritual journey, like Dancing in the Light or Out on a Limb and that sort of thing, she mentions seeing a healer in New Mexico who took her on past life journeys, past life therapy, basically healing trauma from the past in past lives. And well, this was her. This was the very person who had written this book, The Healing of Emotions. And so I learned about that as I read the book. And I called them up from Hamburg there to New Mexico, and I said, "Yeah, I'd like to do some of this." And they said to me, "Where are you calling from?" I said, "Germany." They said, "Oh, we've got an institute, a branch in France. Here's their phone number. Why don't you book sessions there?" So that's what I ended up doing, and it's like one thing led to another. I ended up getting to know. I stayed in this French country inn in the middle of nowhere, the French countryside, and got to know the owners. They were shuttling me back and forth to my sessions, and the husband was also doing the coordinating for the facilitators there. They were holding sessions in little cottages in the countryside around there. So anyway, I got to know them, and I did some really deep healing work, starting with working with issues with my parents and past lives with them, because those were are if we have a betrayal in a relationship in adulthood, chances are that's a theme we're working on from a spiritual perspective. And if you look back in childhood, you'll inevitably find that betrayal was a theme to the child. And we act somehow we recreate the problems we have with our troublesome parent of the opposite sex, or if one's gay, the parent of the same sex, and those reappear in our adult relationships. It's like our soul is working on that theme, and it's not going to give up just because you've grown up. It brings it into your new relationships. So that's why we often encounter the same pattern in a subsequent relationships, because we haven't finished it working on it yet. So betrayal was the theme I was working on in these sessions, and the first thing they had me do was working on past lives with my parents, because they are such a major part of our our uh, our lives. Parents have such an influence on us, and they aren't your parents in those past lives. They could be any relationship to you. They could be your children, for that matter. We won't go there, but that only that it was extremely powerful and very transformative. So I did a lot of that work, and while I was then I went back to after I was finished with my sessions, I went back to Germany and continued with my work, and got a call in February of the next. So this was in December. I had the sessions the following February. I got a call from the husband of this couple who ran the hotel, and he said he and his wife were breaking up, and he was going to leave. And how did I feel about helping her run the hotel? I had no experience whatsoever. I was an engineer. What did I know about running a hotel? But I had turned 40 that year, and I was longing to move more into my heart and into my and in my heart just said yes. So I trusted it. And at that point I hadn't found the Course in Miracles yet. This was still me kind of winging it. But I had been opened as a result of my also the work that I did there. So I said yes, and I quit my job and I moved to France, and I started helping her run the hotel. And that's a whole story in itself. But in the process, I got to inherit his role as the coordinator for the Light Institute's work. And I got to have family rate family rate sessions, air quotes, uh, as many sessions as I wanted from any of the facilitators that weren't busy. So I just did a ton of work, clearing more clearing work. As things came up, I would then address them in these sessions. So that's how I started working on healing the broken heart and the betrayal wound, because it was deep. And so that led me the the director of the French Light Institute. She was also facilitating, and so I had a number of sessions with her. And she said to me, I think you'd be a good facilitator. How would you like to train to do this? And she said, I'm going to be offering a class, a training in January, next January. Are you interested? And again, my heart went boom, like the song. I said, yes. And I was into saying yes because that was my where I was now. The spirit was showing me it's worth paying attention. And so I did. I trained with her. And while I was training with her, I met someone who was a student at the Barbara Brennan School. So one of my fellow trainees was a student at the Barbara Brennan School, and so she was telling me about this NASA scientist who had the ability to see energy and had developed healing techniques and that sort of thing. And I was interested, but still didn't realize how interested until if you go to some of these intensive trainings. It was like a month-long training, right? So every day we were doing 3 hours a day of intense healing work on each other. And there was a fellow trainee, a guy, and we hit it off, and we had, we were just flirting. We weren't involved in any other way, but we had a nice flirting relationship. And one day we gave each other practice on each other. And I guess he didn't like what happened in the past life where he showed up. That was a surprise that he showed up in one of my past lives, and that he didn't like what happened there. And suddenly he wasn't talking to me. And I thought, whoa. And then the weird thing was I felt this pain in my solar plexus there, and it felt like I had a gaping hole there. And I couldn't understand it. What's going on? I mean, I look fine, but there's definitely a feeling of having been torn. Or, and so I asked the woman who was a student at the Barbara Brennan School if she could see anything, and she said, "Yeah, you do have a big hole there, and you are leaking energy." And she said she explained to me that sometimes in relationships that end abruptly, or in a big argument or blow up, one of the people will. Oh, I should mention that people form these energy channels in close relationships. So we have them with our parents, and they're just the channels through which nonverbal communication flows. So understandings, they can be just just feelings that we have between us, and it's normal. It's all our important relationships have them. But sometimes, if that relationship goes awry and there's a big blowout argument, one of the people will rip their cord out of the other person and leave damage. It'll cause a tear. And so she explained that to me. I didn't know anything about that. And she said, "Would you like me to fix that for you?" I said, "Yes, please." So then she moved her hands over my solar plexus and moved her fingers. It looked like she was, I don't know, weaving something, and the pain disappeared. And I felt fine again. And she said, "All done." And I said, "What was that?" And that's what she told me about the healing work that she was training for at the Barbara Brennan School. And I thought, whoa, I had no idea energy could hurt you, could cause physical pain. And so that was the beginning of my healership journey. And a lot of my healing of the betrayal continued through my training in the following 4 years. It's a 4-year healing training program where we had to go into our depths. We had to go into our shadow. We had to go into all the places where we were wounded, all our traumas, so that we could support clients to go through theirs. If you can't do it for yourself, you can't help someone else. You have to provide safety for them, and that means you have to know what they're going through. And so that was a big. That's why it's a 4-year program. It's a huge transformative experience, and you get to look at everything, however unpleasant. You overcome the fear of diving deeper into what seems to be a dark part of you, and then you learn by going through it that there's a gem in this, a piece of yourself that you had disconnected, waiting for you to reclaim. And it was a long journey, but very worth it. It's not something that just happens overnight in that sense. Especially traumatic events, they do take time, because you have to find the courage to go there and to be with the things that you're afraid to revisit. But you do it with help. So with a proper facilitator, they can provide you with the help and the support and the energetic support to move through it and come out the other side released. So that was so in the process of healing my broken heart and my betrayal wounds, I became a healer. And so I see a lot of that in clients that I work with, and worse things. But I come from a place of this feeling so supported by spirit in the work, and I always open to the Holy Spirit in my healing work and to God, and ask for a miracle on behalf of the person that I'm working with. I don't know. I have techniques, but ultimately it's up to the person who's being healed, to allow in what's available to them. And so that's why it can be such a long process, not because it's difficult, but because we aren't always ready and willing to see what we need to see. And the thing that we discover is that underneath it all is pain and a wounding that happened usually when we were really young, and sometimes even in the womb. And sometimes it's not even our stuff. We just took it on, but we didn't know it. So it's beautiful, sacred work. I love my healing practice. I love seeing the light in my clients. Even when they don't see it, I get to see it, and I get to support its emergence in them.
It's all really, really interesting. Everything that you just described, it's really fascinating. Before we wrap up, how can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Well, I suggest the best way is to go to my website, energyisreal.com. It's one word, and that's also the title of my book, Energy is Real, which is it's kind of a manual for managing your personal energy. And it's written for the person I was before I learned all this stuff. Basically, somebody who's woo-phobic, and they just want to know how to drive their energy. Like you just want to know how to drive your car. You don't need to know how to repair the transmission. And so I wrote a book for the mainstream person. So because some people are afraid of New Age term, it can get pretty complex, New Age terminology and that sort of thing, and you don't have to know all that stuff. I don't even mention chakras in the book, because you don't need to know that to be able to work with your energy effectively. And so it's a beginner book for somebody who's interested in learning more. And so it's an easy introduction to the subject, but it's practical. So it's full of exercises to teach people how, by experience, how this works, and give them some tools they can use in their daily life when they feel pushed around by other people, dominated or angered or whatever, to get them back into balance and to be able to manage their emotional state and or their mental state if they're confused. All of that is part of your energy. So if they're interested in learning more about the book, I provide links on the website. And also, if they want to get a copy of my email newsletter, they can get as a freebie they can download the first chapter of the book, which contains 6 exercises they can do for learning more how to sense energy, which I think is a great place to start. If they're curious about energy, learn to explore it for yourself. And so it gives them some fun exercise they can do, even with their kids. Kids love playing with this. So I think that's a good place to start. And for those who are more scientifically oriented, there are there's some free research. There's a page of links to scientific research sites, actual places where they're doing scientific research into the human energy field and how to manage it and that sort of thing. So there's lots for them to sink their teeth into in the website.
Wonderful. I'll make sure and put that in the show description, energyisreal.com. Gail, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for having this conversation.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you.
I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.